Socrates believed we can only realise our human potential when we nurture the most precious, the most permanent part of our beings, our souls. When we do right, we protect our soul. When we do wrong, we harm it. Knowing right from wrong was fundamental to every aspect of life. And in 5th century Athens, the issue was acute. As many as 4,000 legal cases were heard each year. Democracy had revolutionised the law courts. Now, any male citizen, from aristocrats right down to fishmongers, could be a judge for the day. We're told Socrates found such amateur governance troubling. If those sitting in judgment weren't qualified to understand the difference between right and wrong, then they could convict an innocent person. They'd be punishing someone who didn't deserve to be hurt. But in Socrates' view, the innocent person would only suffer physically. It's the jurors who would be harming themselves much more. By unknowingly doing wrong, they would inflict terrible, lasting damage to their own souls. In order to protect Athenians, Socrates needed to teach them. The only evil is ignorance, he said. But Socrates faced a problem. The Greeks did have an ethical framework of sorts, but it wasn't either clear or consistent. The destiny of all Greeks was in the hands of the gods. They were venerated, even though their personal lives were pretty short on moral guidance. Capricious and vengeful, they fought with each other, they slept with one another's wives, they abducted mortals. And appropriately, the gods didn't seem that interested in human morality either. Living a good life didn't guarantee favour with the gods. Respecting their power and offering the most expensive and bloodiest sacrifice was a much safer bet. Greeks did, however, believe there were 5 virtues: justice, temperance, courage, piety and wisdom. But in practice, these virtues were slippery, shifting ideals. What was considered just or pious for an aristocratic man wasn't necessarily the same for a slave woman. In Socrates' experience, traditional moral thinking, the kind taught by elders and priests and epic poets, just didn't stand up to scrutiny. His philosophy became a search for more robust, universal definitions. Socrates thought that all the virtues were interlinked. They couldn't be separated. He thought of them as one thing, something he called knowledge of the human good.
For him, virtue is knowledge of the human good. He says that this knowledge of the human good is going to, in some sense, save your life. This is really strong language.
But is that an abstract idea, or is this something that can play out in people's day-to-day lives?
Oh no, absolutely. Knowledge of the human good is what enables us to make the right practical decisions in our daily lives. But it's going to look different in different contexts. For instance, if you're on a battlefield, it will manifest itself as courage. If you're sacrificing in a temple, it will look like piety. And it's through those decisions and actions that we are enabled to take care of our souls, our most precious possession, on which all our happiness depends.
But that means that people have real agency, because it seems to be that he's saying it's not down to the gods to make the world a better place, it's down to us.
Absolutely. Socrates is saying you don't have to depend on the whims and the caprices of the gods. It's really about individual empowerment and responsibility. And furthermore, whereas he inherited a tradition which said there was one kind of virtue for a man, another for a woman, one for, a well-born person, another for a slave, he's saying no, it's about knowledge of the human good in a universal sense. It's available to everybody. Cicero later says of him, he brings philosophy down from the heavens and into people's homes and into people's individual homes. This really is a very radical moment in Western thought.
Exciting and empowering, but also dangerous.
Indeed, because even though Socrates himself was personally very religious, as far as we know, very pious, this is socially threatening, it's threatening traditional religion, and of course these messages are disturbing to a lot of people.
Socrates didn't deny the existence of the gods, but his emphasis on the capacity of humans to shape their own destiny could be seen as challenging their traditional roles. Fortunately, the sacrificial fires to the gods, which had burnt for centuries, were now lit in a city that also prized freedom of expression. Initially, Socrates' unorthodox ideas were tolerated. But then, in 431 BC, the good times looked set to end. The violence of Potidæa escalated into all-out conflict. The pitiless Peloponnesian War between Athens and its nemesis, the city-state of Sparta. Here at the National Archaeological Museum, funerary urns depict the heartbreaking suffering and loss experienced by the Athenians. With Spartan hordes ravaging the countryside around Athens, Pericles ordered every citizen from the surrounding area to come inside the city walls. It was a fatal strategy. A new kind of terror was unleashed from within. Athens became one giant refugee camp. With the population hemmed in together, a deadly disease spread like wildfire. The symptoms were ghastly. Sweats, fevers, a suppurating rash, and a racking cough. At a conservative estimate, at least 1/3 of the population was wiped out. Angry and frustrated, Athenians turned on their poster boy and removed Pericles from office. Eventually, he died. It's believed of the plague himself. A thriving Athens had been robust enough to deal with the searching questions of Socrates. Now, with confidence ebbing away, tolerance was threatened. Yet, energised by the same sense of crisis and danger which motivated the philosophies of Confucius and the Buddha, Socrates seems to have flourished. By now in his 40s, and surrounded by war, death and disease, his search took on a new intensity.
How do we decide what is good?
Is wealth a good thing?
What makes us truly happy?
In Athens, Socrates wasn't the only one discussing big ideas with its embattled citizens. The sophists were cocksure, showy educators, masters in the art of persuasive argument. They acted as speechmakers in legal trials, entertaining huge crowds in stadiums. Socrates was sceptical, to say the least. Like the sophists, he challenged orthodox thought, but he also passionately believed that philosophy should have a higher purpose. Clever ideas and persuasive arguments just weren't enough. To the sophists, smart words were currency. They sold their services to the highest bidder. But Socrates refused to be paid, preferring handouts from friends. That's not to say he didn't enjoy worldly pleasures. He drank and made love, but barefoot and unwashed, he stood out in materially minded Athens. We're told that he marked past shop stalls in his shabby robes, saying, "How many things I don't need." He saw wealth as impermanent, a distraction from the search for absolute values. Socrates believed you couldn't buy knowledge, and wisdom didn't come from listening to long speeches. It could only come through something else. Dialogue.
So, Bethany, I understand you're here to do a documentary about Socrates.
Yes.
Why are you making this documentary?
His Socratic method worked something like this. Socrates would engage someone in the street.
I can learn something more about Socrates and I can share that knowledge with the people who are watching it.
These are big words, knowledge and truth. Should we take one of them? What would it mean?
He'd ask them an ethical question.
So what is this thing, knowledge, that you want to impart?
In my book, knowledge is love of what it is to be human.
The person would attempt to define the concept, but Socrates would find inconsistencies in their answers.
Knowledge is love.
Love, yeah.
Okay, so if you wanted to have an operation for an appendicitis, would you go to a woman who was full of love but knew nothing about surgery?
No.
Okay, so I would say that the definition of knowledge as love is not good enough.
They would be forced to withdraw their definition and to reformulate and refine their ideas.
So let's try it again. Is there one kind of knowledge or many kinds of knowledge?
Knowledge is one.
Take your time. I
yeah.
don't know the answers to this.
Maybe knowledge is one thing, but knowing is many things.
A professor.
This process would spiral into a dizzying round of question and answer.
To
Yes.
know how the stars move and to know how the liver operates is the same thing.
No, they're not the same thing.
Does the person who possesses knowledge in a big way know everything? Between those two, who is probably the best scone maker?
The one who... I don't know. I don't know.
Come on.
I give up. I give up.
Socrates likens his role to that of a midwife who helps to nurture and deliver the thoughts of others. But it was never an easy birth.
I have to say, the one thing you've proved to me is that I know nothing.
No, that's me. I am the expert at making other people know things, but I'm no good. I know nothing, and that is the only knowledge I claim for myself.
That Socratic method is fascinating and stimulating, but it is also infuriating.
Yes, because it's in an oral context, the way we do it, and Socrates famously believed in the supremacy of the oral over the written, and that also stirs up the emotions.
Yeah.
First of all, in his pretense of being the fool, the ignorant
Of
man.
knowing nothing, yeah.
Yes, and because that is his tool, that he turns, in fact, against his friends or opponents, as you may take it, and makes them admit to things that they don't want to admit to by playing essentially the fool, saying, I know nothing, I know nothing. I can only ask you to tell me because I know nothing. So he laid an emphasis on definitions, then on what he called diaresis, division, of breaking down a problem into little parts, analyzing it, and then attacking each one separately, and then trying inductively to group them back together into a more general concept. So Socrates uses that to make people become aware that things they consider simple and elementary and basic, and that they know, they in fact don't know.
And what about the modern world? Do you think we could have the modern world without Socratic debate, without questioning what it is to be human and what it is to be human in the world around us?
Well, I think that the best way to accept, to find Socrates' place in it, is to see that the opposite of the Socratic method essentially is fanaticism and dogmatism. And in that sense, the modern world very much needs an antidote to those things at every level.
The Socratic method was cathartic. It got difficult issues out into the open and defined concepts with much greater precision. Socrates' tough questioning with his trademark irony was conducted in public, causing a stir wherever he went.
He was inviting everyone to seek knowledge of the human good, to identify fundamental truths. But people could only do this for themselves by constantly interrogating their actions and most deeply held beliefs. The unexamined life, Socrates said, is not worth living.
But there was a problem. Socrates' teaching found particular favour with the young. With no end in sight to war with Sparta, These human resources were vital to Athens' future. Laws attempted to protect